You're live.
But you can't see the screen.
Oh, it's
Yeah, make it
muted.
that.
And we're still live.
I think we need to try. Yeah, but you still can't see the screen.
I will once she starts talking.
No, she doesn't even want you to see her. She just wants you to see the screen.
We're still live.
Yeah, there's 105 people watching you not talk.
Okay, guys, thank you for coming today. I'm going to talk to you about our Bobcat Rehab program that we have at Bobcat Rescue.
Can somebody shut that front curtain there?
Oh, let me grab it.
Got it, Ashley? Oh.
Pause.
Okay.
Lighting issue.
Okay.
There needs
Hey,
to be
turn
a
that
pause
light
on
out
this.
over the top of Karma. There you go.
Oh boy.
Sleepy
You're in the front row. You got to stay awake.
That's why we moved to the front row so we would stay awake. I know.
You ready?
Yeah, it's live.
It's all happening.
So we're contacted several times a month by individuals that ask us, or they've seen a bobcat in their neighborhood and they're worried about it hurting their children or their pets, or maybe one of their neighbors is threatening to shoot it. So they contact us and ask us if we can relocate that bobcat for them somewhere else. Our answer is always the same in these situations. It's no. The bobcats that are captured have to be released within the same general area that they were captured. And so they'll just travel back to their territory and most likely get hit by a car trying to do so. Some people think that shooting the bobcats will get rid of their problem, but really territory is in such high demand that another one will just absorb that territory as well. So what we do is best we can is counsel people on how to live with their wild neighbors. Bobcats in general can live pretty close to humans and not cause any problems. So if people just take a few proactive measures, they can keep bobcats from coming onto their property. We give advice about small farm animals, keeping them in enclosures that have roofs on them so predators cannot jump into them, or keeping them in barns at night. And also, if they're feeding squirrels and birds in their backyard, they're going to naturally attract predators, and most people don't think about that, but they can attract bobcats, coyotes, raccoons, and snakes into their yard by feeding those cute little creatures.
Is this where we do a break for your squirrel huts?
Yes. And I like squirrels. Anyways, check out my Etsy shop. So
They can't hear you, so speak up.
I'm talking so much louder than my normal level. It's like this high and like this high. It doesn't go up there.
Come on, Mom.
You've already had 67 comments.
Oh boy.
Getting me off track. So those podcasts.
Sorry, I thought I had my volume turned off.
So in most cases, bobcats are nothing to fear. If they're approached, they'll run away. As long as you're not cornered or feel threatened, they'll leave people alone. And while bobcats can contract rabies, they are not carriers of it. So if they get rabies, they'll die soon after. But they do keep animals that are carriers of rabies in check. So they're actually a really good animal to have as a neighbor. Bobcats are found all throughout the United States. The Florida bobcat is in all types of habitats, oak tree, pine tree forest. They really like areas with thick palmetto bushes that they can hide in. In rural areas, their territory will be anywhere from 5 to 6 miles. And in urban areas, their territory can be 1 to 2 miles. It just all depends on the prey density and the area that they are living in. The bobcat's the most heavily harvested cat in the cat family over the past 20 years. Thankfully, due to the general decline in interest in wearing furs, this is decreasing, but still 30,000 bobcat pelts are exported from the United States annually, with an all-time high of 50,000 pelts being exported each year. In the mid-'80s, they estimated the population to be around 1 million individuals, but there hasn't been any more studies to estimate how many bobcats are currently in the United States. Sorry, it's just like right there.
It's at the screen and not your face.
Because I feel like it's right there.
It's just because they're having a hard time hearing you online.
So wild bobcats come to Big Cat Rescue for 2 reasons. The first is due to injury, almost always from being struck by a car. The bones that are most often broken in these situations are the leg bones or the pelvis bones, as they get clipped as they're almost across the road. But other times they can have head-on impacts where they get fractures in their shoulders, or they can even get skull fractures, resulting in brain damage, blindness, and mental insufficiency to be able to survive on their own in the wild. Injuries come also in forms of disease. Severe parasite infestations can result in overall weakening of their immune system. So if they get mites or mange or something like that, it can take over their body and make them more susceptible to getting infections if they have small injuries, and then those injuries can get very large and their bodies can't fight off the infection. We've even seen bobcats come here with birth defects, so that's from having really small populations that are inbreeding, where they are trapped by development on all sides of the forest that they live in. We have a lot of prescribed burns here in Florida, and those are intentionally set fires to clear out all the underbrush, so that if there's a lightning strike in the forest, it doesn't take up and make a huge forest fire. There's not a lot of fuel for it. So periodically, the forestry department will go in and do prescribed burns to keep all that stuff in check. Fortunately, these burns displace animals, so sometimes it means orphaned bobcats or families that are getting injured and the mothers can't get to our cubs. So cool. She's So the rehab process for bobcats that come to us with an injury is to treat the injury, give the bobcat a sufficient time to recover in our hospital or in the rehab enclosures, and then release the bobcat back into the wild. The second reason bobcats find themselves in need of rehabilitation is because they've been orphaned and they're too young to care for themselves in the wild. And these are some cute little bobcats. The rehab process for the orphaned bobcats is to wean them from formula as quickly as possible with minimal human contact. We don't want them to imprint on us. We'll even provide a surrogate domestic cat. If we can find a nursing domestic cat that's amenable to having wild bobcat introduced to her, we will do that so that the bobcat will grow up more feral. So after the kitten is weaned, we'll teach it survival skills using a hands-off approach, and then finally release into the wild. Bobcats in the rehab program get the same veterinary care that all permanent residents do. I can't handle it. So they get when they arrive here, they get a full physical exam. They get their blood drawn, which is tested for infectious diseases. They're vaccinated and dewormed, and then they're treated for fleas using oral medications. Rehabbers have to be licensed to house and care for wildlife. FWC, which is the Florida Fish and Wildlife Department, permits one license holder per property. So here at Big Cat Rescue, we have one licensed individuals, and then all the rehabbers work under that person's license. Volunteers and interns are eligible to help care for the rehab bobcats. Currently, that position is open to level 5 interns and senior to master keepers. The number of positions at any given time is 6. Each person gets 1 day of the week, and I take the 7th day. Each keepers feed and clean the enclosures 1 to 2 times a day, depending on the needs of the cat, and every 3 days the keeper enters the enclosure to clean the enclosures, because the wire that the cages are made of is much smaller, So we can't clean from the outside, so we're able to shift the cats away from us so that we go in and clean up the cages. Anytime that we're working around the bobcats, we don't engage with them. We make minimal eye contact with them, just enough to get a good look at them each day. We don't talk around them, and we even wear these ghillie suits that you see here with some of our more imprinted cats or orphan kittens that we don't want to become imprinted. So as a requirement by law, we have to keep daily care charts for each of the rehab bobcats. So, and these can be inspected at any time. So we have to make sure that they're always up to date and they're filled out daily by each keeper. And on that, we log the date, the time of day, what kind of food we gave them, their weight, if we weighed them. We note if we clean the water, because sometimes their water needs to be cleaned multiple times a day, depending on if they mess it up. And then we list enhancements that we make to the rehab enclosure, which would be giving them some sort of enrichment or putting a new shelf or platform in there for them to use. And then just some general notes and that the keepers can look at and see if, you know, what's been going on with that cat since they last took care of it, so they can be most up to date when it's their turn. We currently have 6 rehab enclosures. This is when we just had 4. They're across the lake from the party house, and there's a line of trees that go all the way around the piece of property that they're on, so you can't see them from over at the party house or Tiger Outback and that sort of thing. The location is very secluded, so the bobcats can recover with minimal human impact or influence on their daily routine. We currently have 6 enclosures built out there. We have the 4 on the left and the top 2 on the right. And we plan to do another 2 in the future if we need it. Each enclosure is divided into 3 phases. So there's limited, intermediate, and full training. Limited is for kittens or injured bobcats, and that's that small section all the way on the left. It's 10 feet wide by 20 feet, or 10 feet wide by 20 feet long. And it's divided into 2 sections with a guillotine door, just like the cages for our permanent residents. The intermediates, the height of that one is 6 foot, so that way the little kittens or maybe a bobcat that's recovering from a broken leg, they can't climb very high and jump down and get hurt. The next one is the intermediate, and that's 40 feet by 20 feet, and again, that's divided with a guillotine door. And then the final portion is the full training, which is 180 feet by 20 feet, and it has heights of 10 feet in that section. So the largest section of the rehab cages, this is looking down the largest section, it's 3,600 square feet, so that's much larger than your average sized home. We keep the grass high and natural, weeds and all, so that makes a very fun time cleaning. And this is the chain link that the enclosures are constructed of. It's 1-inch galvanized steel chain link so that the kittens can't get through the wire, and for the most part it keeps the live prey inside the enclosures. Inside we also use den boxes that double as transport crates. So we'll take the crate in there and build a boma of brush around it to make it really natural, to kind of simulate their hiding spots that they would have in the wild. So under all that brush is what the crate looks like. Each wooden box has holes drilled in the sides for airflow. It has a guillotine door on one end that can be operated from the outside of the enclosure, and then a back door that folds down so that when we're in transport from here to the release site, we can open that up so they get more airflow in the box. But then also that 4x4 panel of wire on the inside is on tracks so that we can use a push stick to actually push them out of the box at the release site if they don't want to come out on their own.
Genius.
This was we designed that feature after one of the releases that was an hour and a half trying to get it out of the box.
It's like gator recovery.
Because the enclosures are roofed, we can't incorporate trees for climbing, so these are some of the older rehab enclosures we don't use anymore, but same concept. We put in swinging platforms or swinging logs so that they can get a feel for an unstable surface, and they can also get higher vantage points in the enclosures. And so these are the old rehab enclosures that are back behind, like Frankie, way back in the corner of the property. So as I was saying, all the, just like the enclosures in the sanctuary, the rehab enclosures have different sections that are divided by guillotine doors that are operated from outside the enclosure. That way we can lock them in any one section so that we can get in and do maintenance to, or cleaning in any of the others. Every part of the enclosure has to be comprised of small wire in order to keep the live prey from escaping, so this even includes the water boxes. So we have to use keys to get in to change their water each day. So that's pretty much all about their enclosures. I'll just go through all this stuff, and then if you guys have questions, you can ask at the end. Now we're going to talk about how we do the training for their hunting skills. So the main diet of the Florida bobcat is the cotton rat, but they also eat rabbits, snakes, birds, turkeys, and as seen in this camera trap photo, they've even taken down full-size deer, which is really impressive for such a small animal. The bobcats in our rehab program are fed almost exclusively rats. During their rehab, they'll receive maybe 1 to 2 rabbits per week, and occasionally we'll get quail or turkey if we have a case where we really want to test their hunting skills, if we're not getting enough information from just the rats. So in order to teach young bobcats how to hunt, we developed a system that closely mimics what the mom would do in the wild. So in the wild, the mom would bring the whole prey items back to her kittens and put them in front of them and teach them to eat it, or open it up for them and they'll just get a smell for it and they'll start eating it. And then she might bring some injured wildlife back that the kittens can play with and make the kill themselves. So in order to mimic this, we created our feeding station. So that's just a very large dog crate with the hole cut out of the top. And so once we have the cat or the kitten eating whole prey after they're weaned, we will train them to use this box. So that takes a series of steps. So first what we do is they're eating a whole prey item. We'll put the whole prey on the ground next to the box for a couple of days, and so they get used to coming at a certain time to the box and eating the food on the ground. That takes like 2 or 3 days to get the routine down, and then once they've got that, we'll put the whole prey on top of the box. And so when they come to the ground where they've seen it before, it's not there, they'll start smelling around and they'll find it on top of the box. We'll do the same thing 2 to 3 days on top of the box. Once they're trained to come and jump on top of the box, we'll put it in. And we do the same process with that. So once they're trained to fully jump in the box to get their food, we'll switch out the whole prey for a live prey. And really that's all the training they need, is a small area to get the live prey in. Their wild instincts will kick in instantly and they'll have no issue at all. So with this feeding station, we also discovered an undesired timing. So you can see I just put the rat in there and I'm leaving, and we don't want them to associate us with food. So we really don't want them to come that soon after we've been there. So we're kind of teaching them inadvertently, still humans and food go together. So that's when we made the feeding station 2.0, and that's a Rube Goldberg machine. So what that is a complex contraption comprised of a series of devices to perform a simple task. So basically we just wanted the rat to go in the box without us being there. So in order to accomplish this, we put a valve with a slide door on that chute that goes into the box. And so we could load the rat into the chute with the valve shut. And from the valve, there was a rope going off to a post nearby. The rope went through a pulley down to a bucket that had a misting system on a timer. So we could put the rat in there, set the timer for 30 minutes, and then as the bucket fills with water, it gets heavy, it pulls down the rope, it pulls open the chute, and the rat falls in. So we'll be gone for half an hour to an hour before they ever get the food, so they're not associating us with them getting dinner. This wasn't fancy enough for us, Victor said. So we got Wi-Fi operated doors now that we're working with. We're still trying to get good signals, but it kind of allows us to do the same thing. We can put this is a blind fence out at the new rehab enclosures, and we can put the rat into that big canister, and then using an app on our phone, we can open and shut the door. That's like super fancy. So once the bobcats become skilled at hunting live prey in the feeding station, we'll move up to using the PVC tunnels. So those are connected to the rehab enclosures, and they allow us to deliver the food from a greater distance away to help remove ourselves from the situation. These are the current design of the rat tunnels. So this is the old rehab enclosures, so we kind of had like a maze of tunnels that went into the enclosures, and the rats could choose different directions to go to get in there. The only thing that I really didn't like about this was that each entry of the PVC pipe into the cage just made a weak point in the enclosure that you had to constantly check for degradation of the wire. So with the new rehab enclosures, all the tubes are contained inside of the rehab enclosure. And so they run through the walls of each section from one section to another inside. And at each dividing wall, there's a guillotine door in the tube, so we can manually open and close those doors and decide which routes the rats are going to take. So depending on what kind of access the bobcat has to the enclosure, we will make sure that the rat can only go to the enclosures it has, or if we want to challenge it, we can force the rat to go all the way to the biggest section. So at the end of each tunnel is a drop station, and the rat's placed inside there and the lid's screwed on. Having those different entry points into the rehab enclosure allows for variation of timing when the rat's going to come out. The rat can use those tunnels to evade the bobcat, so it adds that element to the situation. Here's a little video of them in use. And this was one of our early cages, so we only had one exit point into the rehab enclosure, so the cats really learned quickly that food's going to come out the end of that pipe. One tip that I learned going through the whole design process of using those tubes for the rats is that they wouldn't navigate the tubes unless there was holes drilled in the side to create pinpoints of light for them to follow. And it was very important that those drill holes be kind of on the underside of the curve of the pipe, so that when you have rain, the pipes didn't get flooded. So we're always challenging ourselves and changing up the program, trying to make it better. So we had Rat Tunnels 2.0, which was the wire tunnels, and we were having an issue with the tubes being pretty dirty from the rats going in and out of them. So we made these really airy, clean tubes, but then that took away the element of surprise, and the bobcats could see the rats coming a mile away. So then we went to Rat Tunnels 3.0, and that is the same PVC tube, but this is the underside of it. It's got a lot of holes drilled in it for drainage, and then on the top of the pipe there's holes drilled like a foot apart along the top so that rainwater can help wash out the tubes. During the rehab process, it's critical that we're able to observe what's going on with the bobcats. So we do that in many different ways. We'll use camera traps to watch them in the enclosures. If there's something particular we want to see, like if we want to see if they're jumping on something, we'll give them a small platform and put some kind of enrichment or something on top of it to encourage the bobcats to go investigate it, and we'll set the camera up right on it. We also use surveillance cameras on all the rehab enclosures. Each section has its own Nest Cam. And then one of our first rehab enclosure has 2 live streaming cams that are on explore.org. So those live streaming cams provide us with a wealth of information because we have people all over the world watching these cats 24/7 and can tell us if they see trends or if they think something's wrong with the cat. They can alert us so that we can be out there because we're not out there with them all day. We're giving them as much space as possible. So it's been really useful to have extra eyes on these cats.
Shout out to Christine for the daily Bobcat reports
Yeah,
now.
that's the best. We have one viewer that writes us an email every single day with screenshots of what the cats do, and it's been really super helpful for us to document the daily behaviors. This is just some clips put together of, they're all in the old rehab enclosures, but these were using camera traps and surveillance video at the time. So that was an 18-pound turkey, and I'm an 11-pound bobcat. And this was Chance. We actually never saw him during rehab, or when he was in rehab, but the only way we could see him was through the camera traps because he was so shy. So Florida law states that wild bobcats that have been rehabilitated must be released on a minimum of 40 acres of privately owned land. So they can't be released in the same general area where they are found. So they can't be released in state parks, which everybody automatically assumes that would be where you would release them. We haven't gotten any reasoning why. I'm assuming it's mostly probably a liability thing. That maybe they don't want to be responsible for rehab and released animals. So what we try to do is develop relationships with ranchers that live close to very large tracts of natural land, so that the bobcat can venture that way if they so choose. Sometimes if we're having difficulty locating a release site, we might put a post out on Facebook or something asking for help. But we have a database that we've put together of release sites within each county, so that now when we get cases, we have a couple people that we can choose from and ask them if it's okay to release on their lands. Whenever possible, we deployed camera traps at the release sites so that we can kind of keep an eye on what's going on with the bobcats. Sometimes those cameras will be at the site for a couple months, and some of them have been there for years. During the initial exam of the bobcats that come in, we always take pictures of the spot patterns on their front legs and their back legs, as well as their face. These are going to be the areas that are the most identifiable on camera traps. So we always keep all that information so that later if we set up a camera trap, we can identify our bobcats. These are just some of the camera trap pictures at different sites. The top left picture, below it is a close-up. So if you look again at the top left picture, you can maybe see the bobcat in the upper left quadrant of that photo. It's very, very small. So we have to really comb through these pictures, and sometimes we get thousands of images on a camera that we pick up. So it takes a lot of work to go through them. Obviously with that picture we wouldn't be able to identify which bobcat that was, but it's just interesting that it was in that image, and a closer look we were able to find it. We also get a lot of other animals. So otters, pigs, turkeys, deer, raccoons, coyotes. That was the one and only tortoise I ever got. That was really cool.
What is that animal on the bottom left?
Is that a squirrel?
That's a fox squirrel. So we don't have any here. They're more like north of us in larger like cattle ranch type areas. But they're probably like 4 times the size of the squirrels that we have here on property. So they're really cool. So, with all the documentation of the rehab program that we do, and how visible we are to the public, we get a lot of requests for our protocols for caring for our rehab bobcats. So we're always super happy to share that with people, and this is just a list of some of the cats that we've been able to save in different areas by sharing our protocols with organizations there. And that's a cute little baby jungle cat kitten. So these are the 2019 rehab bobcats that we've had. This is Bandit. He was captured by a farmer for eating his ducks. And these ducks were his livelihood. He raised ducks for a living, so he couldn't afford to lose them. But he didn't want to kill the bobcat like all the other farmers told him to do, so he contacted us, and since the cat was already trapped and he didn't know what to do with it, we went and took that bobcat and relocated him. He went to 12,800 acres in the area. Sky was our one of our most recent releases. She was a nuisance bobcat trapped on a farm. The trapper intended to release her at a different location, but Sky gave birth in the trap, which is the first time we've ever seen that happen. But this was an awesome situation to happen for us to be able to observe how an actual mother bobcat takes care of her babies. So because she had to be relocated, she couldn't be just taken to a different area and released because she had these newborns with her, and in that situation she would abandon them because she needs to establish her own territory. So we brought her here to rehab her for 7 weeks, so that the kittens were old enough to eat whole prey and follow her around, so that when we took them to a new release site they would be able to follow her and keep up with her so that they could establish their new home. And this, who's the lady that does the daily report?
Christine.
Christine was super helpful in the daily reports with this one because, like I said before, she gave us a report every day of what was happening. So we've kept all those emails. So I can go back later and kind of modify our program or make changes just based on how she took care of her kittens so that we can better mimic how they would be cared for in the wild. Sky and her kittens were released in Orlando area on 1,200 acres. Normally, we've had groups of orphans that we didn't want to release a large number of carnivores on one site at one time. But in this situation where she was going, it's very densely populated with prey. So it should be no problem at all to support 4 new cats going to the area. These are the 2 currently in rehab, Cinder and Ash. Cinder was found by an individual and turned into the SPCA when she was 6 weeks old. And Ash was found and turned over to a rehab facility that didn't have resources for taking care of a big carnivore to adulthood. So both kittens came here and were on a quarantine period for a couple of weeks, and then we introduced them. It's really easy to introduce orphans together. They're always accepting of one another and they just want to play, so it's the best time to introduce cats. And they became best friends instantly overnight, and they are super active out there playing all the time. And they are actually in the explore.org cage where you can tune in and watch them 24/7. This was a sad little case that we had this year. Pebble was 5 weeks old. She was discovered in the bushes behind a person's house, and she had been orphaned. She was severely dehydrated and emaciated. She weighed a pound, but at her age she should have weighed almost 2 pounds, so she had lost half her body weight. Sadly, she barely survived 24 hours before she passed away. Just because she had developed some neurological symptoms close to the time of her passing. We were concerned at the possibility of rabies or infectious disease, so we sent her to the state lab to have necropsy done, which confirmed that her death was due to dehydration and starvation. So even though when we got her and we gave her sub-Q fluids and she ate a good meal, it was really too late. Her organs had already started to shut down and they couldn't manage processing liquids or food. And then this is our most recent release, Alpha. She was released at the same location as Bandit 10 months after her rescue. She was found orphaned along the side of the road, picked up by some concerned citizens. When we got her, we noticed right away that when she hissed at us, her jaw was crooked. So we had her examined, and it turned out her jaw was broken. Dr. Justin fixed her jaw at the Humane Society of Tampa. But with that broken jaw, some of the teeth were growing in incorrectly, and we didn't want, even though the fracture was repaired, we were concerned that she would have issues with those teeth that were affected. That's why she stayed here for longer than usual, so that we could periodically sedate her and x-ray her teeth and make sure that there wasn't going to be any issues. She ended up losing one of her molar teeth because it was growing in kind of sideways, pointed at a different tooth. And we didn't want her to have like some big infection she couldn't deal with in the wild, so that tooth was taken out, but it shouldn't affect her ability to hunt at all. And so this is just a quick little look at some of the most interesting cases that we've had here. This is the first bobcat that I worked with here. Faith came to us when she was approximately 8 weeks old in 2003. Prior to her arrival, we had only ever rehabbed and released adult bobcats that were injured. Everyone had always told us that you couldn't take an orphaned kitten and raise it to a point that it wouldn't be habituated to people and it wouldn't be releasable. And back in these days, there wasn't a lot of information out there to be found online. So we took her in and we decided to give it a try. And really the whole program was built around this cat, just kind of experimenting on her rehabilitation, but in the end it was successful. In the wild, a bobcat would stay with its mother for up to a year before venturing out on its own. We always make an effort to coordinate the release of orphaned bobcats with 6 months or older, but we also like to try to do it around springtime so that there's new, easier prey on the ground. Faith was here for a long time. It was our first orphan, and so she was actually almost a year and a half old when we released her. She was released on a 2,000-acre ranch that borders 18,000 acres of parklands. So we pointed her towards the parklands, but she ran directly behind us and into the ranch. I skipped a video. Here's a little video of her rehab.
Good sound.
Bobcat, born to be free. It was her right to have a loving and protecting mother to raise her in all of the ways of being a bobcat. But Faith's mother was killed by man. With all of the will and resolve of a bobcat, Faith went looking for help. By the time she found her way to BobCat Rescue, she was nearly dead from starvation and dehydration. Since the beginning, BobCat Rescue has rehabilitated and released many bobcat adults who have been shot or hit by cars. The vets can patch them up in a matter of hours, but it takes weeks or months for their shattered bodies to heal. BobCat Rescue gives them that second chance. A baby bobcat is a much greater challenge. She will need to learn the language of bobcats, but some of our bobcats cannot be.
Bailey. We thought maybe a bobcat needed to talk to her, so she learned bobcat
Always
language.
be on the lookout for danger. She has
Don't
to
mind
know
the serval
what
in the background.
animals are good to eat and how to catch them.
This was when we first developed the feeding station.
BobCat Rescue has to teach her all that she will ever need to know to survive without the bobcat seeing her keeper. If she were to ever associate man with food, it could be the death of her. It's a lot of hard work, her live rats are expensive, but it's worth it to be able to give her back the freedom that she was born to inherit.
So then you saw her run away the opposite way. So then we set up camera traps there, and this was one of our longest studies of the site. And a year after we were still getting images of her, this is just a funny close-up of her eyeball when she was sniffing the camera. But I took some leaves out to the site that Bailey had scented and put them next to the camera trap to see if she would recognize the smell of her friend when she was younger. This was our most stubborn ever bobcat, Thor. He was an adult bobcat hit by a car, and this is actually the picture that I got on my phone in the middle of the night. We get calls all the time for bobcats that have been hit by a car, and a lot of times it's misidentification. So whenever possible, since so many people have smartphones, we ask them to please send us a picture before we drive hours to go catch a bobcat. So this was the photo that was texted me at like 2 o'clock in the morning. So this was only 20 minutes from the sanctuary. A woman had been driving at night, saw the bobcat stunned in the middle of the road, and she contacted us to see if we could help. Meanwhile, the sheriff's department came on the scene, and they actually secured the intersection from traffic. It was kind of a slow, quiet road, but they kept people off of the intersection until we could arrive, which is very unusual. He was an absolute train wreck. So as you can see there, his teeth are different heights because his jaw was totally broken, flapping in different directions. The main side for his injuries was his left, mostly his head and torso. He had that broken jaw, he had a fractured eye socket, his top canine was fractured, broken off, totally missing, and also his shoulder blade was fractured in multiple places. So his jaw was wired together using a temporary wire. An aborted dentist did a root canal on that broken canine because it's so important for them to have those canines for hunting. We didn't want to just take it out, so he root canaled it so it wouldn't get an infection later on, and then he kind of ground it down and burred it away to make it as pointy as he could so that it would still be functional. He had multiple the little incisor teeth, the little tiny ones between the canines that had to be extracted. So that's a crazy looking eye. His eye from the fracture continued to swell, making it difficult for him to blink, and so the eye was getting dried out. We had a boarded ophthalmologist come here and look at him, and she prescribed him eye drops 4 times a day, which that's impossible to do with a wild bobcat. We got him once with a syringe with a needle on the end, so it was like high velocity eye drops, but after that there was no more. He was not having it. So we sedated him, and she sutured his third eyelid shut to protect the eye until the swelling could go down and he was able to blink. So to complicate everything even more, he refused to eat or drink for days, and we could only do so much. We fixed what we could fix, but it was really up to him to eat and to take medications to help him feel better, and antibiotics to keep infection at bay. So here's a little video.
Turns out it was up to you, not him.
I'm very stubborn too, so Thor it was a losing battle for Thor. So this is me. I basically made him a meat shake and put it into a syringe and use a long pole syringe to get it into his mouth. And usually when you approach them with something like that, they hiss at you. And if you get it in there, they'll swallow it. And so once they kind of get the taste for food again, they'll start eating again. So we went from that meat shake to some operant. He's very angry. But eventually he graduated each day to eating stuff so that he was eating off of a plate. We went through this for a few days though. He only wanted to eat off the stick, so I had to just keep lowering the stick each time, getting it closer and closer to the ground. And then to get him to drink, we just had to add a lot of water to his bowl to make kind of like a soup, which was super disgusting and messy. But eventually he started eating on his own, which was great. So we were able to hide the medicine. We had to buy him a $50 water fountain so that he would drink water. But he super loved the fleecy beds in the hospital and became quite accustomed to them. He recovered indoors for 8 weeks before being relocated to the outdoor rehab enclosure, and then he spent another 5 weeks healing out there, regaining the muscle mass that he had lost. And he was released on 100 acres, and he was stubborn to the very, very end. So we released him, and he turned back around to tell us what he thought about the whole ordeal. And you look at me, I'm like, no, you go. Here he is on his camera trap that we use at his site to monitor his progress. This is 4 months after release, and he's doing great. Chance was the one that we found with birth defects. So he was just a few miles from here, found on a tennis court, and he couldn't figure out how to get off of the tennis court. He was trapped. He looked like he was injured, so he was actually caught by a trapper who we contacted and were able to get him for rehabilitation. He had come from a very developed area with very small amount of forest, so most likely the inbreeding was the cause of the birth defects that he had. It looked like he was born with only one eye. The eye that was missing was very small and deformed the structure of where the eye would be. He also had a hole in the abdominal wall that he had herniated some of his internal organs through. That hole, that may happen if a cat's hit by a car. The impact may cause a hernia like that, but this particular opening was very smooth, so he most likely was born with it, but he did get hit by something that caused him to herniate his organs. He had surgery to repair the hernia, and then he spent some time in the recovery hospital. There you can see he's missing his right eye. And he had 8 months of recovery from his surgery and then was released at the same location as Faith. And so, lucky for us, we were on his blind side. He went right around us. He stopped by to say hi at one of our camera traps several weeks after his release. Poseidon was a case of huge parasite overload. He was found lethargic and empty on an empty lot in a rural neighborhood, and he had been there all day. All the neighbors had seen him just laying in the grass in the yard. We arrived on the scene to capture him, and it was immediately apparent from all the crustacean all over his face and body that he had scabies, which gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Can you tell people what that is? Because you may not know what scabies are.
That's my next slide.
I'm sorry. I thought you were going to go right by that one.
So he almost his face looks like charred, like it was caught on fire. It's just a huge crustacean all over the infected area. A skin scraping confirmed that it was scabies, which is contagious skin infestation of mites, and those mites burrow into the skin and lay their eggs, and they can cause allergic reactions and rashes that then are open and susceptible to infection. So that's why it's all very red looking. So everywhere he had these rashes had been kind of like opened up and oozing. It was super disgusting. The good thing about this is that it's really treatable with one of the dewormers that we use. So it seemed like it was going to be a good outcome for him. But the amount of infection that he had was just all over. It was on his face, his head, his shoulders, his neck. X-rays showed that he had multiple bullets in him. You could see one, that bright white circle kind of in front of the shoulder. That's a bullet that was inside of him. He had a lot of bite wounds all over his body, like maybe a coyote or something had attacked him. He was super dehydrated, very anemic, and very underweight. And despite everything that we did for him, we gave him fluids, we tried to get him to eat, he was just too far gone by the time he got here to recover from the infection that he had. And sometimes we do these drastic heroic efforts and they're not successful. Skip was an adult male bobcat that found hit by a car. He had severe injuries to his pelvis. The pelvis was crushed on one side and totally disconnected from the spine on the other side. He had metal plates and screws. That long screw was connecting the pelvis back to his spine, and then all the extra bits of pelvis bone that were floating around were taken out, and the remaining larger pieces were connected. You can see the top spine is much shorter than, or the top pelvis is much shorter than the lower pelvis. It was all connected with a plate and screws that would be permanent. He had 8 weeks of recovery in a small cage in the hospital, and it was really important during this time because of the severity of those injuries that he remained very still. And trying to tell a wild bobcat to be still and rest is like talking to a wall. He was very unhappy being confined inside. He just wanted to escape and tried tearing apart his enclosure all day long. So we prescribed him a course of pain meds and anti-anxiety medications to help keep him calm. He hated being checked up on, and when we did check on him, he would just hunker down and not move, so we could never see if he was putting any weight on his legs. And this is when we started first using webcams to monitor the bobcats. We set up webcams on Skip and live streamed the video feed, asking the public to help keep an eye on him. And during this time, he became the first BCR cat to have his own fan club. They called themselves Skipaholics, and they made a page and everything on Facebook. And they were from all over the world and tuned in at all hours of the night and kept us up to date on what he was doing. He was being way too active, so we had to adjust his medications. And they were the first to discover that he was having a hard time defecating, and he started vomiting immediately after eating. So we knew right away those symptoms that he was blocked and he needed to be taken to the vet for x-rays. He regained his ability to walk, however his pelvic canal healed too narrow, prohibiting him from being able to pass food that had bones and fur in it. So that's when he became blocked, is when we started giving him whole prey. Up until then he had been eating mush and small cut up meats, so he was able to pass those foods fine. But because of all the activity that he had during his recovery process, his pelvis shifted and healed too narrow for him to be able to pass those larger items. So because he wasn't able to eat whole prey, he wasn't able to eat live prey, he wouldn't be a candidate for release. This is a video of him. He became a permanent resident here at the sanctuary. And you can see that he was doing really well, having a broken pelvis, walking around. So it was really frustrating having spent all that time and effort to try to get him to a place where he could be releasable, but then not having it work out in the end. So he became a permanent resident here at the sanctuary. He was off the tour path because he really didn't like people. And he was here for quite a while, before 9 months. Before one day at feeding time, he started running around his enclosure, foaming at the mouth, and he had a massive seizure and passed away. He had no symptoms up until that day, and we were all kind of around the enclosure at the time it happened, so we tried to give him some emergency drugs to bring him back. I actually tried CPR on him, and then after those things were unsuccessful, I realized to myself that I had just got mouth-to-mouth with a bobcat that was running around foaming at the mouth and then died. So I just possibly exposed myself to rabies. And at the time I wasn't vaccinated for rabies. So this is my little shout out to get your rabies vaccines if you're going to do wildlife rehab, because it's super important. So what we had to do was send him to the University of Florida for a necropsy. Sections of his brain were tested for rabies, which all came back negative. But there was a time period where I had to wait for the results before I could go get the vaccines that you need should you have been exposed. So for like a week, I was like biting my nails, not knowing if I had rabies or not. I was being super cautious to not spread my rabies that I might have to other people. And it was just
We kept her locked in her office.
it was just a really stressful time, and I didn't like it at all. After the necropsy results came back, they discovered that he had some form of bacterial infection in his brain, but they weren't really sure exactly what it was. It wasn't rabies. They sent him to a study in California where they were doing a research project on infectious diseases in bobcats so that they could get some more answers. But unfortunately, somewhere between Florida and California, he was lost in the mail. So we never got any further answers on that. But I did get my rabies vaccines after that. And it cost $900 for a series of 3 vaccines. Definitely worth it. This is Ace. This is a very, very skinny bobcat. She was found lying on the front steps of a busy office park. Numerous times the people that worked there had seen her eating out of a dumpster. There wasn't much habitat around for her to hunt in. And when she came in, she was so thin that we worried that she was not healthy enough to sedate. So we just put her out in the rehab enclosure and fed her for a while to help get her weight up before she had an exam. This is after she had gained weight, and she was 11 pounds at her exam, so she was much smaller when she first came in. We always test their blood for infectious diseases when they come in because we don't want to potentially put a bobcat out in the wild that's going to spread an infectious disease to other bobcats or the Florida panther. Fortunately, Ace came back positive for FIV. We estimated her to be around 15 years old. She had cataracts in her eyes, a lot of muscle wasting, her teeth were worn and yellowed. So she just looked a lot like the older cats that we have out here. Because she was positive for FIV, that's a disease that attacks the immune system in cats. It's transmitted through blood and saliva, and we didn't want her to spread that to the wild population. So the Florida Fish and Wildlife Department allowed for her to become a permanent resident here. She really didn't mind it because she had been living around people in close proximity for most of her life, and she was always waiting in lockout for her food. So she it was kind of a good retirement for her. She lived here for 4 years before she passed from her disease. This was another experiment that we did. This was Hope. We got her at 4 weeks old, so she was still on the bottle. She was found alone on the side of the road next to an area that had been cleared for development. We took her back to the site to see if we could hear the mom calling out for her, because sometimes a kitten may appear orphaned, but it's really just the humans came upon it, and the mother might be hiding in the bushes waiting for them to leave. So whenever possible, we try to make sure that there's not a mom out there looking for her kittens. If there is, we'll reintroduce them. Unfortunately for her, we didn't hear any such calls, so we put out a call to our domestic cat rescuers and asked for a mother that had kittens that we could have, and we got about 5,000 calls in 3 minutes because everybody wanted us to take their mother with kittens. So here's a little video of Hope with her foster family.
It's been a long journey for Hope and an amazing experience to watch her grow up.
Whenever we worked with her, we didn't give her any attention, so she basically grew up as a feral cat.
So did the kitten.
Being
So did
adopted
kittens.
by a domestic cat family gave Hope the perfect opportunity to learn skills that she would need to survive in the wild. At just a few months old, Hope moved into an enclosure designed specifically for rehabilitating bobcats. It is in here that she would learn how to climb trees, conceal herself in the brush, and hunt. This experience would give her first-hand knowledge of what it's like to live in the wild. At nearly a year old, Hope is finally ready to be released back into the wild. She has learned how to hunt her own food and take care of herself. Hope's release day was a day that big cat rescuers dream of, to be able to watch as one of these beautiful cats is returned back into the wild where it rightfully belongs. It's definitely been a long journey, Hope, and we wish you all the best.
So with Hope being the first cat that we recruited a domestic cat foster family for, we documented everything with video, the whole process. And there's a series, I think, of 13 videos on YouTube. If you just look up Hope the Bobcat, you can see her whole progression through rehab. She was released on the same ranch as Faith and Chance. And her story was so unique that it was featured in National Geographic Kids magazine. This is a pretty quick rescue, but it's a good example of why it's important to have a vet that you can depend on to come out and help with certain situations, because we're not allowed to travel around with sedation drugs and sedate cats on our own. We have to have a vet that can go with us in situations. So this is Fencer, and the couple came out in their backyard to have their morning coffee, and they saw this thing hanging from their fence. And when they went up to investigate it closer, they found that it was a bobcat, and they called animal control. And then we ended up getting the call. Lucky for us, a lot of times we will get a call of a bobcat that's injured, and we rush, and drive hours to go get it, and it's gone by the time we get there. In this situation, he was stuck. So we knew for a fact that he would still be there by the time we got there, which was good. We were able to get pretty close to him and blow dart him and sedate him, but he was so high strung and amped up from being stuck in the fence that after multiple darts you see there in his leg, he's still looking at us down here. So he never fully went to sleep, and we were worried to keep sedating him with more and more drugs, so we just had to kind of bite the bullet and get him with a catch pole and some gloves. We got him into our squeeze cage, and then you can see there in my hand in the gloves is his foot, and there's a little piece of wire wrapped around his toe. And you can see that in the top image as well. So basically he was trying to climb the fence, and the connections of the fence, the way it's woven, if pressure's put on it, the joint kind of opens up. So when he went to climb over it, it opened up, his toe went in, and then when he jumped and released the weight, his toe was snagged in the fence, and that's how he became stuck. We just cut the fence right out around where he was stuck because we didn't know if it was at the time what was happening and how it was going through. So once we sedated him, we were able to free the fence off of his toe, and there's the segment there. And then we noticed on the left-hand side, you can see the middle toe has those two kind of diagonal lines going through it. That's broken. So the toe bone was actually broken on that foot. But because there's toes on either side, it's kind of like a natural splint. So we didn't do anything to repair this fracture. We just gave him some cage rest for 8 weeks in the hospital. And then this is a follow-up x-ray, and you can see how much calcification's grown over that fracture. So it's stabilized itself. He was super ready to go and wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. So he was released 6 weeks after going outside in the recovery cage on 7,400 acres of land. This is a really good example of how resilient wild animals are. Ivan was found in a rural neighborhood a couple hours from here. And like I said, sometimes we get to a site and we can't find the bobcat because there's nobody to watch it until we get there. We have to just go by the last known location of the cat and search the woods as best we can. A lot of times it's really overgrown. This bobcat was seen in a little undeveloped plot of land along a creek in a neighborhood. And we basically just fanned out and walked the whole forest for hours. We nearly gave up looking for him until we heard dogs barking down a few houses. So we followed the sounds of the dogs barking, and in the backyard was the bobcat. And we captured him near the water's edge with a net, and it was immediately apparent once we got him in the crate that he was actually missing his left leg, and you can kind of make that out in that picture there. That's just a little bone sticking out on the top of the towel. And so, as always, we're willing to try anything and everything to save these guys. So the whole drive back, we talked back and forth about whether or not we should try to rehab a three-legged bobcat. We've never done it before, but it doesn't mean it couldn't be done. There's been other three-legged animals that have been rehabbed and released, including wolves. And so by the time we got to the clinic, we decided that we were gonna give it a try. We would just amputate this leg properly and give it a go at rehabbing for release. It wasn't until this cat was sedated that we discovered this. So he was actually out there on no front legs, running around for weeks prior to his rescue. The bones were super worn down and dry and brittle at the end, and we believe that he was a victim of trapping because, I mean, to get both of their legs that much damage and to lose both front limbs, there's not a lot of things that could cause that. But it's pretty amazing that he was able to live for weeks out there like that. But unfortunately, and obviously, there's nothing we could do for him not having front legs, so he was humanely euthanized. So introducing orphans to form pairs or groups is really good for them because when we get a single orphan, most likely we'll get another one. There's kind of a season that the orphans come in. And so we'll try to make pairs and groups so that when they're released, they can be released together, and that'll kind of more mimic what they would do in the wild. The siblings would go off from their mom together and kind of help each other out initially when they're on their own. So the same thing is true for when they're released. They stay together for a period of time until they establish their own territories and feel comfortable eating each other. So these are some unusual color variations in bobcats. In that orphan group, we ended up pairing 4 orphans, and the one on the left is Foxtrot, and he actually had little white toes on both back feet. And we've seen that in one other permanent resident that we've had here, another bobcat. There's also 14 documented cases of melanistic bobcats, mostly found here in Florida. Out of all the cat species, the 11 are known to come in a melanistic black form. So Bravo, Tango, Echo, and Foxtrot became our largest orphan group to date. But like we discussed before with the kittens, Sky and her kittens, we were worried about releasing all 4 of these guys onto a piece of property because it would put a huge pressure on the prey base there. So we decided to split them up into pairs, and we released Foxtrot and Echo together on 280 acres. And then Bravo and Tango released later on 1,000 acres. Their release was very memorable as they were released on Creek Indian Preserve lands, and the tribal leaders came out before the release and did a blessing on them before they went. This is a good example of how expensive rehab can get. Bellino was hit by a car found on the side of the road. She had a severely broken leg and her tail had been degloved, requiring a partial amputation. The animals will often not tolerate external fixtures like a cast or a splint, so all the repairs to broken bones have to be permanent plates and hardware inside the body so that they won't mess with it. The cost for her surgery was $3,800, and it required 4 months of recovery time in the hospital. After she spent that time in the hospital, she was ready to go to the outdoor rehab enclosure. Unfortunately, when we let her out of the crate into that enclosure, she ran across the enclosure and right into the fence. So this is the repair to her leg on the right. You can see how straight that pin is, and then that's what she did running into the fence. She totally bent the pin and all the screws and displaced her kneecap with the new shape that she had created there. She required another $1,400 surgery and 4 more months of hospitalization. And then during her entire time here, she racked up a $1,200 food bill. So at more than $6,400 later and 16 months of recovery, she was finally ready for release. And this is her being released on 500 acres, and she ran away just fine. But it's a good example of how expensive this kind of work can be. If it's something that you're interested in getting into, it's very important to have a good fundraising base to help fund all these things. Here's our permanent resident, Mrs. Claus. She came in with head injuries, and after months and months of trying to rehabilitate her, it became quite apparent that she was a little special upstairs. Unable to survive on her own, she became a permanent resident here and lived with Nabisco for a short period of time before she went psycho on him. This is one of examples of a prescribed burn that left an orphaned bobcat. Ended up in the news. The firefighters in the area that were doing the burn found the bobcat. We paired it up with another orphaned named Captiva. And they were raised together and released together at the same location. This is just them playing in the rehab enclosure. The video's a little jerky because it's from one of the traps. And they're really good at amusing themselves out there. There's a side-by-side of Phoenix when he came to us and when he was ready for release. Slightly cross-eyed. And here's a side-by-side of Captiva. They were released on 14,000 acres together, and they were actually released in a territory down south that also is home to Florida Panthers. This was before we had that little push wall in our cages. So once they went out, we had to shut the doors quick to keep them from coming back in some cases.
I remember that. Like, no, get out.
Although we will miss Phoenix and Captiva, bobcats are wild animals.
So each release site has different restrictions, and sometimes we can invite volunteers and interns and staff to come observe the releases. Other times the site wants to be anonymous. It all depends on the landowner's preferences. This was Noelle. This was another first for us. She was found on the side of the road, hit by a car. Same story. She had actually been laying there for 6 hours. It was the day after Christmas, and the family had gone out to a family function and saw her at noon. And then when they were coming home later at 6 p.m., they saw her still on the side of the road. So they called for help. And a local rehabber went and picked her up, and we got her from them. And when we got her, we did x-rays, and she had 2 broken legs, both on the right side. So her right front arm and her right back leg were broken. So you can see the lower picture here, that kneecap is totally displaced from the femur. And then the upper picture, you can see that at the elbow, the bone is totally disconnected. So this was another one that was like, do we try it or not? Because with one leg, at least they have 3 legs to support themselves on, or if they had opposing broken legs, they would have 2 legs to balance on. But not having any support on one whole side of her body, it was kind of an experiment to see if it was something that would be possible. We decided to give her the chance and see how recovery went. And Dr. Justin did her repairs at Humane Society. This is fixing a double fracture in 60 seconds. So there he's getting the bones laid up so that he can put the plate on. And so the plates come in long sections, and they cut and form them to each individual fracture.
Do you make this music?
Yeah. So then you can see the plate spanning the bone. And the surgery took probably 3.5 hours to complete. But it was well worth it after months of healing in the recovering hospital and even more time out in the rehab cages. She was released, and she ran away just fine. She was released at the same location where Sky and her kittens went. It's a very large tract of land, about 1,200 acres, just teeming with wildlife. So it was a really great place for her to go. So in conclusion, the goal of the rehabber is to care for the injured wildlife with as little human impact as possible, to give that animal time to heal and recover and be ready to be released back into the wild. Each and every case is different, which makes working with wildlife rehab very interesting all the time. You get a lot of different cases. You get to develop your program and change things and tweak things along the way just to make it better and better. It really allows for big use of imagination, which makes it a fun thing to do. But definitely big parts of it are making relationships with landowners that you can release on their properties, having a relationship with a vet that's willing to work with wild animals and willing to travel if need be. Definitely knowing orthopedic surgeons for all the broken bones that you'll end up seeing. Documentation of all the protocols was so useful that we're able to share it with so many different places now. So sharing that information is definitely important to the rehab community, and working together with other rehabbers just with one common goal is very rewarding in itself. definitely, the rehab program here is my favorite part of working at Big Cat Rescue, because while we provide a really great place for all our permanent residents that are here at the sanctuary and we give them the best life possible, like, this is what it's all about. It's about them living in the wild. So it's because of you guys doing tours and taking care of the permanent resident and working in the gift shop, and everything that is involved in the day-to-day at the sanctuary allows for us to build up the funds to be able to do things like this and put these guys back out in the wild. To date, we are at 65 bobcats that have gone through the rehab program, and that's all thanks to you guys. So thank you very much. And so that's it.
So one of the questions I have on here that you kind of touched on was, do you ever get photos or videos of the cats that we've released?
We do. It all depends. Like, bobcats are very tolerant of transient bobcats. So some carnivores will not allow another one to be on their territory, and they'll fight till the death. Bobcats are very amenable to other bobcats going through their territory to find their own territory. So sometimes we'll set up a camera trap at a release site and we'll never get images, most likely because that bobcat's moved on. But other times we'll get pictures, years later. So it all depends on the cat and the location. Is that it?
You're just getting all kinds of kudos and thank yous and that you're superheroes and all that kind of stuff from people that have been watching through the whole thing. They've been saying that. Shout out to Holly in the back, who is trying to put together a list of other Bobcat rehabbers. That's something Jamie's wanted forever, is an ability to network with those people and stay in contact with them across the state to help get more cats more help, because nobody has the kind of facilities or protocols that you have here.
Yeah, our program is incredibly unique in that the size of the enclosures that we're able to provide the cats with. I mean, that you just don't see that anywhere else. It's really insane that we can do that. Any questions? Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
I have some camera traps and some paw castings up here if anybody wants to take a look at them.
Well, there's somebody that was asking a question. They want to know if the witness protection cats are still here. But they are.
Is this like a dog or a coyote or?
Yeah, so we get calls all the time for there's a bobcat or a panther or whatever, and it's really easy to tell dog from cat because the dogs, you can get an X between the foot pad and the toes, so you can see like a pretty identifiable X, especially when it's like imprinted in the sand. So like here, if you were to do that, it would go right through the pad. Right. So that's the biggest, and the shape of the track is more oval, where the cats are more round. Mm-hmm. This is bobcat. It's coyote. Yeah. Oh, this? Sure.
They ask if you had a favorite bobcat that you rehabbed.
Thor.
Hi, Carol. Thor.
Thor was a beast. We butt heads the whole time. What'd you think?
So that was Shere Khan's pup?
Yeah, that's true.
Who's the little one?
A bobcat. Yep, one of the rehabs.
Okay.
Another interesting thing is you can tell which track you're looking at by their lead toe. So to identify a lead toe, like just imagine this was in the sand, right? So this is kind of opposite. But if you look at your hand, your middle finger's taller than your index finger. So that's their lead toe. So this is taller than the rest. So that's the lead toe. So this would have been the right front. It's more open, there's a lot more space in between here. If it was all these toes were close together like Easter, it would be a back foot. We're just trying to get, what was this one? Tiger. It's a coyote, yeah.
Well, yeah, the claws.
Yeah, but sometimes bobcats will even leave claws depending on like if it's like clay type mud, their claws will poke out and stick. So you really have to go by the X and the overall roundness or ovalness of the
track.